these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. Another phenomenal episode. So phenomenal, you're going to want to give it 5 stars, like you do every episode. We really appreciate that. Today, we're talking about a subject that has been front and center in the year 2020, and that's race relations. It's the issues of multiculturalism, issues of development in minority communities. You know, what is wrong with our criminal justice system? What isn't wrong with it? Is America inherently sinful and evil or not? You know, what is the truth, objective truth behind all of these questions? And they're difficult conversations to have. You get blasted no matter how you, I think, approach this conversation. And so, of course, as usual, I ask for help on how to approach these sorts of conversations. And no one better than Dr. Shelby Steele. Dr. Shelby Steele is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Was written on a wide array of subjects, including race relations, multiculturalism, affirmative action. Dr. Steele, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm going to continue talking about your bio real quick. So you've won numerous awards, including the Bradley Prize for contributions to the study of race in America, the National Humanities Medal, and an Emmy for the documentary 7 Days in Bensonhurst. You received National Book Critics Circle Award for the book The Content of Our Character, A New Vision of Race in America, and much acclaim for a recent book, Shame, How America's Past Sins Have Polarized Our Country. We've done much other writing, of course, in many journals and publications. Got a PhD in English from the University of Utah, a master's in sociology from Southern Illinois, and a BA in political science from Coe College in Iowa. And and you've also just got a movie out recently called What Killed Michael Brown, and which is fascinating. Watched it last night, so we'll get to that too. I do want to start with how you got into this this business, this area of expertise to begin with. I mean, you grew up watching racism firsthand in Chicago, right? And I mean, your parents were very active in the civil rights movement. So, I mean, how did this experience influence your current beliefs? Did you always have these current beliefs? What inculcated that? And how did you arrive at this point?
My parents met and married in the early 40s in Chicago, and they were founding members of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, which was for a long time the nation's #1 civil rights group. And so I was I was what was called a CORE baby. I grew up in the community of civil rights. So I never remember a time when my family was not engaged in discussions of civil rights and so forth. And this was the time when segregation prevailed absolutely everywhere. Everything, race constricted your life in down to minute, silly details. And then interestingly, I'm still around. And I've lived through all those changes. I went through a phase of the Black Power movement. I went far left. I slowly began to work my way out of that, and to function, to understand that freedom was about in America about functioning as an individual and being more than simply an ethnicity or a race. So it took me a long time, a lot of searching, a lot of experience, a lot of activism, a lot of bad decisions, that finally I was able to integrate a new vision. It took me a good while. I was probably in my late 30s before I really got my hands around it. And then I began to write and publish in that area. But I had educated myself pretty much all of my life and read all the great writers who commented on it, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, and so forth. And so to see myself today as they were my mentors in that sense, though I never had a chance to actually meet them. But they gave me a way of thinking about this experience of belonging to a group that was oppressed and had been oppressed for centuries, but was changing, was moving out of that phase into another phase. And I think that's where we're at today. The challenge in Black America, at any rate, I'll speak there for that group. The challenge is not overcoming racism. I think we've already done that. Our challenge today is meeting the demands of freedom. Freedom is a difficult thing, particularly when you come from a group that it was denied to for 4 centuries. How do you live in it? How do you, all the choices it presents you with, all of the, you become responsible for it, throws you sort of back on yourself. So freedom is very intimidating, and the normal human response is to say, no, you're mistaken. I'm not really free. Racism is everywhere. It's systemic. It's structural. It's inherent. And I'm still not free. And because that's in a sense, ironic sense, that's a comfort zone. I know how to deal with a lack of freedom, with bigotry, with restrictions. What I have trouble with is when you take all that away, when you make it against the law. You make it against tradition.
There's a lot of threads I want to pull from everything you just said. But here's where I'm going to go with, because you said that you actually changed your mindset pretty radically in your mid 30s into late 30s. I think to do that, you have to be somewhat predisposed to be open-minded to change an opinion. Okay, you have to make a decision about yourself at a certain point that says, I'm capable of doing this. And as I'm a politician, so I'm always wondering how to change people's minds. It's a constant question, right? We think about it all the time. How do you persuade somebody? How do you get people to see something your way? So, I mean, are we capable of changing America's minds in a broad fashion, the way that you did in your 30s, to take on sort of a different mindset about how we view race in America, how we view freedom, how we view personal responsibility, agency, how we view the history of, like, the story of the truth behind what America stands for in the first place? What is your sense of that? Do you, given what you see in the year 2020, what you see leaders saying, are we ever going to be moving in the right direction on that?
It's a good question. I am an optimist. I believe we will. It's very difficult, and I'm humbled by that difficulty. I think we all are. You don't have a country. You have to think of America sort of as a unit, as one nation. You don't have in that nation 4 centuries of one part of the population oppressing another part of the population, and then slowly understanding how wrong that is and correcting for it. And the presumption is, okay, well, we've, 64 Civil Rights Bill, discrimination is illegal. We can't do that. But culturally and socially, psychologically, it just moves into another phase. As I was just saying, what do minorities do when they become free? How does one you've been used to and developed a culture that is based, for example, as it was for blacks, on the manipulation of whites as a means to survival. So do we keep living that way? And think of, I think, unfortunately, in many cases we have. But that's part of the. I may be getting a little too abstract here, but that's part of the reality that we face down on the ground today. When you look at the Democratic Party, for example, has always been able to count on the black vote. Well, why is that? Because blacks, in a sense, identified Democrats as people who were going to free them. But of course, now the fact is we're already free. So what is it that Democrats have to offer that the other side doesn't have to? Nothing. But the habit is there. It's going to take a while for us to grow out of it. I see some positive signs today. Blacks really opening their ear for the first time to the conservative ideas, to the Republican Party, to even the president. That's sort of the news story of the day, is that there seemed to be a new willingness in Black America to be open to the right and to all of the ideas and so forth represented there. I hope that continues. It's healthy in every way. And why not? We are, if we want to go that way, we're free to do it.
Yeah, and and the question becomes, are people willing to hear it? And you're optimistic that they are. And then the next question is, okay, is our message going to be the right message? As Republicans, we're very bad at selling good ideas. The left is very good at selling bad ideas. So we have to think a little bit harder about how we're gonna talk to people. And maybe that's the question. Like, do you find a specific message that actually works, that actually makes somebody stop and go home and think, have I been lied to this whole time? And because I'm compelled, because I always get asked the question as a politician, like, what are you going to do for me? And I have a hard time answering that as a conservative, because it's kind of not what conservatism is about, right? Conservatism is about institutions and the process and the how. Like, I'm going to solve problems for you with a set of limiting principles in mind to create a stable society that you can thrive in. So what am I going to do for you? I'm going to empower you. But that's kind of abstract to people, right? People want to hear, well, I'm going to give you free healthcare. I'm going to rebuild your school. So it's very transactional, and this goes against conservative principles in many ways. And and so the question is, how do we talk about if people are looking for that transaction, looking to sell their vote? Because frankly, we've inculcated American culture, and this is not unique to the Black community by any stretch. This is an American issue. This is a democracy issue, right? When we figure out that we can vote ourselves things with our own tax dollars based on the false promises of politicians. And so it's very compelling, and it's difficult for conservatives to contend with. So I mean, is there a message that you find that might work?
Well, you said it very well. This is, I think this began with FDR, actually, where he introduced into American life and culture the idea that the role of government was to meet your fundamental needs as a human being: healthcare, housing, education, so forth. That it was appropriate as an American citizen to receive as well as give. And we've continued that, even though we happen to be the wealthiest society in the history of the world. And we remain that way today. But it's an idea then, as you say, that it serves the political left in America. We are and blacks, of course, it's worse for us, because we feel, given what we went through, the word that seduces us is the word entitlement. Now we have certain entitlements. We suffered wrongly. And so justice means entitlements. And so I'm going to be a Democrat because that's where I'm going to get my entitlement. I'm going to get paid off for all of that terrible history. And it's a seductive, as you're saying, it's a seductive idea, and it's very, very difficult to argue differently than that. I can remember my own transition of thinking that, well, is it all what the government gives? Is that all bad? Is it shouldn't we ask for more? Shouldn't we tax a little bit higher for this? And
Right.
so it's a long time to understand. No, this is that's really not what the government is not some sort of equal distributor of the wealth. The government should ensure my freedom. Should leave me alone. My great figure I admire in history is Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
When asked what to do with his newly freed slaves back in the 1860s, said, "Leave us alone." God, if we had only followed that advice.
He had a lot of good advice.
Yeah. My argument to blacks today is, please argue to leave us alone. Any more diversity programs, any more touchy-feely, inclusive programs, any more affirmative action, racial preference. Look at what you did to us in the process of giving us things. You weakened us, you didn't strengthen us. You cut us off from ourselves as the agent of change. I've got to go and join the Democratic Party and be loyal to some in order to, no. I need to identify what I want as a human being, as a citizen. And the government ought to make sure that there are not unnecessary barriers in the way.
So I'm going to pull on that thread a little bit then, since you brought it up, right? And this comes from FDR's policies and the failed welfare policies of the Great Society. You write, post-1960s welfare policies, the proliferation of identity politics and group preferences, and all of the grandiose social interventions of the war on poverty and the Great Society, all of this was meant to redeem the nation from its bigoted past. But paradoxically, it also invited minorities to make an identity and a politics out of grievance and inferiority. And so this is really, I'm just repeating what you've been saying in your own words. But on a practical level, why was this true? I mean, what was wrong with these, let's call them well-intentioned policies that were meant to, as a country, make us feel better about ourselves? And so, what's the truth here? I mean, you've cited statistics on what was happening to Black poverty, Black marriage rates before these interventions, and then what happened after. I mean, what's the right data set that we should be looking at, and how should we, looking back on these interventions, how should we be critiquing them?
Well, I think they all failed. Indisputably, at this time, we know the evidence is there. Public housing has been a disaster. School busing was we almost single-handedly school busing ruined or severely injured the American educational system, not remotely what it was before that. And you can go one social program, one venture after another. They all created, as far as I'm concerned, one overriding original sin. And that is they looked at the people they were supposedly going to help, blacks now newly free and so forth. And they said, basically, not literally, but essentially, they said, we have no faith in you. We have no faith that you will ever be able to lift yourself up on your own. In fact, it's probably even morally wrong for us to ask you to do so. And so in the interest of our need to show you goodwill now that we've let you be free, in that interest, we're going to give you this. We're going to change your school system this way. We're going to bus kids over here and over there, even though we're ruining now, again, the coherence of the American educational system, which was a wonderful one. We're going to do this, and we are the actor. We are the agent of your uplift, not you. And why not? Why aren't you the agent of your own uplift? Well, because we see you as inferior. the same way the slave owners saw you, the same way the segregationists saw you. We don't disagree with the view that you're inferior. Well, here what you're doing, you think you're helping people, but you're infusing them with helplessness. You are taking their soul away from them. They don't believe in themselves. You've destroyed their ability to do that. I've been fighting against affirmative action for God knows how long at this point. And people scream at me, no, these kids they don't have their test scores are lower. We won't have any blacks in college if we don't lower the standards. My answer to that is always the same. Raise the standards. They're behind. If you came out of 4 centuries of oppression, you'd be behind too. What we need is the standards to be raised. We need to ask more, not less. Mm-hmm. Well, we've now had 60 years of these kinds of social interventions, social engineering in the name of the good that destroyed the soul of blacks more profoundly, and I mean this literally, more profoundly than segregation and slavery did. At least in those days, you still possessed yourself. You still could make a family. You still could survive. But this takes your belief in it infuses you with what I call faithlessness in yourself. You don't have any faith in yourself. Well, America's a long way from understanding what it has done over the last 60 years, thinking it was doing wonderful things. Goodness knows how long it will take us to become enlightened and understand what happened to us. It's perfectly natural for us, given the fact that we were newly free, had no idea about freedom, to fall for all of this. And we're still, in that sense, falling for it. That's what the Democratic Party is hoping for, that they want blacks to continue to be helpless, to continue to be people that they can redeem, they can lift up, and thereby bragging to be on the side of the good and the side of the angels and so forth. All the while oppressing blacks, the beauty of conservatism. And this is what and I want to make this point especially. The beauty of conservatism is it does exactly what President Trump said when he spoke in the black church a couple years ago, when he looked at the black audience and said, "What have you got to lose?" That's the first clear statement of truth I've heard from an American politician about race ever. Yeah. No guilt in that. He's just an existential clarity of where you're at. What have you got to lose, for goodness sakes? Why are you making yourself dependent on what the government does? Goodness knows they'll mess things up. Why would you do that when you be dependent on yourself?
Right, it drives a sense of powerlessness. And again, when I'm asked that question, what are you going to do for me? One of my answers is often, I'm not going to lie to you. How about that, for starters? I'm not going to make false promises to you. I'm not going to clamor and tell you what material good I'm going to give you, because it's dishonest. And maybe we should have an honest conversation. Yep. But to your point about the disempowerment, and you said it's worse than segregation, the sort of deeper cultural infusion of helplessness that's occurred. But I think you can make, you make that argument statistically speaking too, by pointing out how black poverty rates were decreasing wildly before the 60s and then basically plateaued afterwards. And so, how do we explain that? The data does back up what you're saying.
Yes, it does. One little quick one. In the 1950s, blacks who went to American universities went into college with slightly lower grade point averages than whites. They graduated 4 years later with slightly higher grade point averages than whites. Today, Blacks have the lowest grade point average and the highest dropout rate of any student group in America after 60 years of affirmative action.
And so,
interesting data.
right. And there's a lot of different data points like that. And plus basically the reversal of single parent home statistics as well. Whereas I probably get this slightly wrong, but it used to be, 70% dual parent households. And now it's reversed completely. And a lot of people attribute that to welfare policies that basically encourage a man not to be in the home. Again, these are well-intentioned, right? You see a single mom and you want to help her in that moment.
Absolutely.
So give her more money. So you study this a lot then. How do we talk about that specific policy in particular? I don't want to go on a tangent because I want to keep talking about some of these other things, but on that particular policy that gives this disincentive to have a dual parent household, what would you think the right policy prescription is to reverse that and get it right, while also still helping a single parent who needs help?
Well, again, when I grew up, segregated all Black community, everybody had a father. The family was intact. There was no Black underclass, and we were all poor. It is that the underclass is entirely a creation of government policy. It breaks up the family and gets the father out of the home, and so I can't imagine. You can't imagine a worse set of policies. How do you get people to understand that? I think we have to sing and start to sing another song. We have to celebrate. What's important to me is in delivering this message is to communicate to Blacks how strong you really are, how much you can really do if you unleash yourself from this idea that you're a victim, that racism is everywhere. Let racism be everywhere. You make a life for yourself anyway. And this is I don't know any easy way other than to keep making. Malcolm X made it, one of my great heroes, who believes that Black power ought to be self-help, and we should not allow whites to take over the matter of our development and advancement and so forth. I tend to think that makes a lot of sense. Wish we'd followed it back then. But we have to continue to argue now. We have to take the argument to Blacks themselves, and as I think is beginning to happen. And here's one little side point that is interesting to me. The president that is least expected to do this is the one who's actually begun to do this, and Mr. Trump. And he is the first president I can remember who does not suffer from white guilt. He doesn't come to me all guilty. He says, "What do you got to lose?" Most we are used to whites come, "Oh my God, you suffered the terrible America's horrible what happened," and so we're right back again in all that victimization. Trump is saying, "Well, you were victims. There's no denying that, but here's freedom."
Right. Here's a different story to tell yourself.
Yeah, and so which way do you? Blacks like that.
Yeah.
This, to me, is the secret of Trump's charisma with Blacks, is that they know he's not going to lie to them.
Right. That's the fundamental message, right? Like, what am I going to do for him? I'm not going to lie to you.
I'm not offering you a bunch of junk. I'm just not going to lie to you.
Yeah, you would think it'd be compelling, and you're right. He's the first president to do so. It's long overdue, and we need to lean into it. I mean, I make that argument on a variety of issues. We have to lean into a lot of issues that Republicans have generally, been on the defense on or just shied away from, whether it's healthcare, environment, and race relations.
Yeah.
And one of the things about to the point earlier about how Black poverty was decreasing, education was increasing. There was obvious data-driven, substantive gains being made, and then it kind of stopped. And Martin Luther King's and the civil rights movement, it seemed to be the pinnacle of that success, right? King's argument was, and you write about this, he never charged, quote, this is, I'm quoting you now, he never charged America as an inherent and intractable evil. In those years, this presumption of an intrinsic evil emerged as a defining theme for my generation. It was a vision of America that distinguished us from previous generations. We were different and by implication morally superior because we were the first generation daring enough to acknowledge our country's evil. So paradoxically, we were enlarged by this evil. It gave my generation a sense of destiny, a job to do in history to transform America away from its inherent evil. So it's like two different movements really that's happening here. One is charging America as this evil entity that needs to be destroyed, root and branch, and we see that in our current movement. On the far left, you ask people protesting, and they're usually white people. Should America just be torn root from limb? And yes, the answer is yes. But this was not Martin Luther King's message. His message was you should be defined by the content of your character. And so I guess my question is that how did the movement veer so drastically? I mean, you saw that movement, you understand it. What are the key differences between that and now, and why are we going in the wrong direction now?
It's a good question. How did we do it? I think the one phenomenon we haven't discussed is why we took it from King to this much more extreme idea of America as evil is in a sense because white guilt, which I'll come back to, made room for us to go that far. White guilt made America deferential to this rebellious idea, this self-destructive idea. We don't have the moral, given all the racism and so forth we've committed, we don't have the moral authority to tell them America's good. We don't have the moral authority to ask for King's vision, which is let's move on. And so we tolerate that. I think today all the demonstrations and so forth that we see in all cities around America is because white guilt makes room for them. Deference is the great moral idea. You pay off history by deferring to those who you've alienated and wronged in some ways. And so we make room for all this protest because of white guilt. What is white guilt? White guilt is that when America admitted its wrong in the 60s, that it had colluded with evil, it had practiced racism for centuries, and so when that you cannot confess something, certainly of that significance, without paying a price. Mm-hmm. This is the price we're paying, is we lost the moral authority to enforce the best of our own principles, to convince the people who we're now setting free that these principles, yes, we abused them, we betrayed them, but they're the only game in town. They are what works, and they are what will bring about your uplift. And we want you to hold these principles sacred. That's what truly has made America free. But no, right? So sensitive. They are so weakened by this lack of moral authority, by the fact that any black can walk up to them today and say, hey, you know what you did. You're not innocent. And so white America has been on a mission since the 60s to reestablish its innocence. And it's much more concerned with reestablishing its innocence than it is with helping poor black people. And
yeah,
which is one of the terrible ironies.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to put it. It's an obsession with establishing that innocence.
You could say, why didn't you see school busings tearing our educational system apart? Why wouldn't you stop that? Well, you wouldn't stop it because you didn't feel you had the moral authority to intervene and enforce the standards that made our educational system so great. And so now it's lost to everybody. This is the real risk of America. White guilt is what has us at risk. Whites do not have the confidence, the moral confidence to stand up for the best principles, the high principles that made America so great in the first place. That's our problem. Blacks, I think, would get in a line in a minute if whites said, hey, we're sorry for what happened, but it's over. And we can't continue to defer to bad ideas to make you feel better, to make ourselves feel better. We've got to go back to those principles that ask something of you rather than just promise to give you.
All right. White guilt's a form of control too. I mean, and I think the most cynical side of me would assume that, and this was kind of Malcolm X's argument as well. The white liberal does that to control you. You see all these white leftists kneeling down, in this almost religious like fashion to repent, but it's that to me, that seems like more of a show, right? It's a bit melodramatic. What it really is another way to control. It's another way to manipulate. And again, that's the more cynical side of me. Yeah. But there's another difference too that you point out, I think, between, the previous movement and today's movement, which is, I'll just quote you here. And you said in response to these recent riots and social unrest, we've been here too many times. We've seen this kind of thing, and then it sort of fades away. And this is already the beginning, I think, to fade. And what was it all about? What was the point? What did these various groups, what did they want? It's striking to me that this particular one is that there was not even a list of demands. Usually there's always a long, elaborate list of demands. And that wasn't the case here. End quote. And so I've said that a lot. I've pointed this out to people. The purpose of some kind of protest is to achieve something. I want to know what you want. Like what, ostensibly, something should make you stop protesting. If you're going to kneel for the flag and the national anthem, what will you stand for? What is the standard that you can set that we can all adhere to that will make you stand again? And if you can't answer that question, then what on earth are we doing? And we've seen the goalposts move constantly, right? Like, well, first it's defund the police. And so, mayor of Portland will say, all right, we defunded the police. Like we moved some money around. The mayor of LA did the same thing. Mayor of Austin's trying to do, a lot of mayors are, but it's not enough. Well, no, we meant to abolish the police, so it's unending in a result. And this is vastly different from the civil rights movement of the 60s, where I think there was a very clear, articulated notion of injustice, right? Like what is really what does the systemic injustice look like? It was very clear. This is what we want to end. And it's difficult to see what that is these days, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is difficult, but that is how it that's how it's come to work. We just sort of we just continue to believe that our victimization is our source of power,
and if they do set their eyes upon a certain set of policies, it's usually centered around criminal justice and police reform. So, so maybe that's my next question I think there's probably some reasonable space for that. As a kind of libertarian leaning conservative, I don't think people should be thrown in jail for all sorts of crimes. I think we should treat the removal of someone's freedom and putting them in a cell. I think we should treat that a little bit more seriously than we do. At the same time, we're letting criminals loose for committing violent acts, and here in Houston, I can say in more than 60 cases this year, criminals have committed a violent act and then recommitted that violent act because of bail reform, right? They've just let loose by left-wing judges who are probably engaging in the same kind of guilt that you're talking about. And that's what's driving this policy. So it's like we're getting it completely wrong. Maybe we are putting people in prison and harming people's lives for reasons that are unnecessary, while at the same time not enforcing laws that truly need to be enforced. And it's having a very extreme effect. But I mean, is there some space, and have you advocated for some kind of police reform, some kind of criminal justice reforms along the lines that, a lot of the people marching probably would talk about, who aren't necessarily part of this radical movement? They're marching because they feel like there should be some reforms. Is there some space for that?
I think that those sorts of issues, police reform is a great example. We can always reform, we can always improve. What's really driving this? I think what is really driving this is we've gotten to be, as a society, afraid. We have no capacity to tell the truth. The problem in America around race is the fact that we have, again, these 4 centuries of oppression left Black people underdeveloped, undereducated, without a sense of how the economy really and truly works, without a full appreciation of free enterprise. That was all denied us. That's our problem now. Our problem is not police, but we make our problem police because we're afraid to tackle the real problems. And society collaborates with that. And so now we'll go through years of talking about police reform. Come on, I know many, this is just not the issue. The issue is the fact that 70% of Black fourth graders can't read. Blacks graduate from high school with reading levels of 8th graders. Well, how do you in a modern, high-tech, highly competitive world, how do you thrive when you can barely read?
Yeah.
You're going to tell me police are a problem? Again, so much of the racial problems we have today that we discuss in infinite, elaborate detail, is simply avoidance of what all we are, cover over our inability to talk about the real problems that are so obvious. The breakdown of the Black family, 80% of all Black children are born out of wedlock. Now, right there, what kind of social programs are going to compensate for that? What kind of police reform is going to compensate for 80% of the Black children having no father?
And that is the number one indicator of success. Absolutely. I mean, it's across all races.
We are being sentenced now by our own desire. We're being sentenced to obscurity, to irrelevance, to suffering. More suffering. You always in this life, we all suffer and suffer until some enlightenment comes. Well, we're all praying for that enlightenment to begin to come. It is just cracking, it seems to me, at this point. But it's all we've got is to say, when people say, look, police are the big problem is Black Americans have, for obvious reasons, been underdeveloped. Have all these, they have to become a modern people in a modern world.
And is this what conservatism, I think, brings to the table, right? So once we get past
conservatism.
Sorry, say that again.
I said this is the heart and soul of
right.
conservatism, which continues to remind you that you are the great source of possibility in this life.
Well, on a philosophical level, yes, but also on a practical level, right. And I think this is what we have to offer more of. Right. And how do we get that message across? So once we've gotten past the truth telling, right, which is, okay, these are the real sources of the problem, right? It's single parent homes, and again, like I said, across all races, that's a very good indicator of how successful you're going to be in life. Is if you come from a broken single parent home versus a 2-parent household. And we can look at other things. Safe communities have a lot to do with it, which is why if you poll the Black community, 80% do not want less police. They know very well that they prefer safe communities, just like most Americans do. I think if you ask them, they want school choice. They want the ability to leave that failing school. They want more businesses to invest in their communities, which is why we passed opportunity zone legislation and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So we've got all of these policies that just we're not breaking through to people, I think, and letting them know about it. But the question I wanted to ask you is the hardest one to solve, honestly, is single parent households. Like you said, I am not aware of a social program that fixes that. There's no amount of spending that fixes that. In all your research, have you found something that, if I'm asked the question as a politician, what do you do about that? It is not clear that there's a really solid answer. So maybe you have one for us that you can help us with.
Oh, I've got an answer that'll shock everybody. Don't have children until you are married and educated and able to take care of them and see to their education. Make sure that you take marriage with extreme seriousness, and that the commitment really means something, and that it becomes a union that is sacred, that you invest your future in, and work hard, have dreams, find out what you're good at, what you love to do, educate yourself in that direction, develop skill sets that make you valuable in the economy in which we all live. Those are the answers. I think probably everybody sees that. Those are everybody's accountable to those rules. No matter what the government does, no matter what policemen do, we're still accountable to those rules. I look at my own father, who had a third grade education, came from the Deep South, taught himself to read and write. He made himself. He made a life by following those rules in a viciously segregated world, where people were being lynched. He made a life. Yeah. You tell me we can't do that today? That's some exotic, far-off thing. It's only exotic and far off because our culture is so fixated on leaving guilt that it never tells. The one thing white America fails at, the one thing white America refuses to do, is to look at blacks and say, no matter what has happened to you in the past, you are entirely responsible for your future.
It's empowering when you say that. It's
do it, and the fact that we're saying only you can do it does not mean that the country is abandoning you. It means that only you can do it.
And the irony of that is, it's what you tell your kids if you care about your kids. Any parent that cares about their kids will teach these lessons and say, you're accountable for your actions. If you work this hard, I'll give you this much. There's rules that you have to abide by. I'll provide structure for you. And, you got to study. And if something bad happens, it's your fault. And that's what a parent teaches their kids because they love their kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Learn from it. Get up, fight again, keep moving. All those life lessons that have to do with being a human being get distorted when you're born into a society as a black, and that society is guilty by what they did to you in the past, and they want to take over responsibility for your life and fix your life up. When, of course, that's an impossibility. Be nice, but it's not possible.
Right. And that's kind of the point. I mean, the solutions to these issues, there aren't hard cut policy solutions necessarily. These are cultural leadership problems that have to be solved, and and they can only get solved by a pretty massive cultural shift.
Right.
One thing you talk about, which I like the term you use, is poetic truth. And this is liberalism's appeal, speaking about a poetic truth as opposed to an objective truth. So can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, it's when you in terms of the Michael Brown story, white cop shoots and kills a black teenager. Well, right away there's the actual truth. What really happened there? We try to delineate that in the film. What really happened there? Then there's the story that instantly starts to unfold of white racism and black victimization. And so there's this, it becomes almost a kind of war over that, between those two truths. Is the poetic truth is that, well, once again, we as blacks are being victimized by white racism, and therefore we are entitled, we are owed reparations, you name it, social programs, and so there's this exploitation of the killing. And we always tell a poetic truth to, we squeeze the facts of the case into this sort of scenario of black people continuing to be victimized by racism, even in modern America. And this Michael Brown proves the truth of systemic racism. Systemic racism is a perfect example of poetic truth. It's a license to define it in a way that serves my needs and so forth. We tried to make that distinction in the film.
Yeah, and let's talk about that term real quick, systemic racism. It's a question that reporters love to ask us politicians. Do you believe in systemic racism? And Republicans are often caught flat-footed on it. If I'm asked, I'll simply say no, because I have thought about it, and I think the word systemic has to mean something, right? It has to apply to a concrete set of institutions or policies that are systemic and based in some kind of discrimination against a race or gender or whatever it is. That would be an objective definition of systemic racism, according to me, and I think most objective observers. And it is certainly true that America engaged in systemic racism at certain points in its history. And I'm going to quote you again because this is a great quote. It says, "Liberalism is invested in an overstatement of America's present sinfulness based on the nation's past sins. It tries to be progressive and forward-looking by fixing its gaze backward." And so this seems to me how we come to this present day term of systemic racism by implicating America's present day situation with the past and deliberately obfuscating the reality. But I mean, let me ask you. I mean, how do you define systemic racism? And do you believe it's truly exists in the way that they describe it? Well, actually, I'll let you answer that, and then I'll move on to a kind of, I want you to steel man the other side's argument as well, and because what they'll say is, well, we don't mean there's a set of policies, we mean there's disparities, and that's an indication of systemic racism.
Mm-hmm. I know what systemic racism is. I grew up in it. I know it. No one can fool me.
Yeah.
Reality is what reality is. I remember when racism was truly systemic. And if I wanted to get a bottle of pop on a hot afternoon from the local store, I had to stand outside the curb to get it. I know what it's like. The claim of systemic racism today is simply a way of expanding our victimization. It says, oh, you thought we were victims in the past. Oh, no, we're victims today because racism is systemic. It's much larger and more vast than you think. And of course, our motive is we're expanding racism because what we're really doing is expanding entitlement. You thought you just owed me this much. In fact, you owe me this much. And I expect more programming. And of course, America jumps to it. Corporate America. Amazon just paid $10 million to Black Lives Matter. You think of all the money that goes in that whites can't wait to pay. So yes, there's systemic racism. And then there's sort of a wink, wink. It's a shakedown.
Yeah.
It's a shakedown. And everybody kind of knows it's a shakedown. But most whites, corporate America especially, happy to pay off a little bit. $10 million means absolutely nothing to Amazon. They're happy to do it because then that wins them their innocence, their look of innocence, and their power is intact. Their brand is still it's still a decent brand. They can't be charged with racism. Well, where's that 10 million going?
I was going to ask you that actually, if you've looked at this about, they made so much money recently, and I certainly don't see any food drives with the Black Lives Matter, paraphernalia around it. So I don't know what's happening with this money.
Yeah. Well, I do. I do. I know where it's going. I know who it's going to, in the broad sense, and I think a lot of people do. But again, whites won't say a word about that. They'll watch that go down. They will put their money on the table as well, because they're so terrified of being called a racist. If they don't support that, if they don't support what Amazon did, they openly take a stand against it, then they're going to be called racist. And that is an extremely powerful weapon in American life today. Conservatism suffers enormously from just being called racist.
Right. It's the number one charge against us, right? We're uncaring, we're racist, and all this. Yeah.
And want the old days of segregation to come back again and so forth. And conservatives are mortified by that.
And you bring up Amazon, and so Amazon actually tried to ban your movie, What Killed Michael Brown. Again, me and my wife watched it last night. It's more than just about Michael Brown, of course. It's a great documentary that just you interview a lot of local residents of Ferguson, people who understood the truth, who saw the many outsiders. They said 90% is what was cited of people coming in, and those riots were from outside the city. We saw this to be true in recent riots as well. A lot of people traveling to these places, activists often paid to do so. A combination of BLM and Antifa, very prevalent in certain cities, really instigating again these riots. I mean, and again, it just gets to this notion of truth. What really happened, and what are we protesting against? What are our demands? This is the thing that's confusing, and in the end, I think the saddest part of it all is that what is the outcome? The question of what is the good that comes of this has yet to be answered, because as we've already stated, the real reasons for disparities in the Black community have not been addressed. Whether it's education or crime or single parent households, these things are ignored. And we've gotten nowhere. We've put in a lot of money. Like I said, Amazon put $10 million in, and then tries to censor your movie.
Yeah.
So what the heck's going on? What was their explanation for that, by the way?
My explanation is I'm saying Blacks are not victims anymore. They're free. Well, that pulls the rug out from under the whole deal. You mean they're not victims? You mean that I don't need to act guiltily all the time? Well, what happens if I go? Oh my God, I can't risk that. And so I don't want people to hear what Steele is saying. It'll mess up the deal. 10 million is no big deal. That's fine. I'm happy to pay it. He's going to come here and say and point up the fact that I've been shaken down, that I'm not guilty. I'm saying I'm not guilty. I'm innocent. No, you are acting guiltily. If you pay $10 million and you don't even know where the money's going, you couldn't even account for it, not for a dime of it.
No, it's yeah.
This is where America's at. In America, we lack the confidence, the moral confidence as a nation to enforce truth, simple truth, simply obvious. Where is the real hard evidence that police are a big, huge, vast problem in American life? We'll fidget around that issue when, of course, we will say nothing at all about the fact that 80% of the children born today, the blacks in America, do not have a father. What kind of better formula could you have to produce human disaster and failure of every conceivable kind? We're cowardly. Race has made us a cowardly people. Even the confession that we made in the 60s, that was real courage. In the day of Martin Luther King, that was maybe America's most courageous moment. Since that time, we've become fearful again.
The irony of the corporation payoffs that you talk about is when corporations hold the line, they're not punished for it. And I don't know why more corporate leaders don't see that. I think there's a variety of explanations. I think there's probably a lot of internal pressure from employees within a corporation, things like that. But you look at other instances, Goya is a good example when they just said, we're not dealing with this. We're not acknowledging this. We're just gonna go about our business. They're not punished for it. If anything, their sales probably go up because there's kind of a silent majority that wants to go buy up their product for standing the line and holding out for truth. So it's perplexing to me that so many corporations actually do fall for it because the goalposts always get moved. The shakedown is real. So
the more you give, the more you'll be required to give. As you say, shakedown's a shakedown.
It's ridiculous. I want to talk about some of some terminology you use. And I like these kind of discussions. They help us all sort of frame the debate a little bit. Let's start with group identity. I'm just going to read a kind of a lengthy quote from you, and then talking about identity politics is important. It's a phrase used often. I don't know if we explain it correctly. So you write, group identities that compensate for the deprived background of the individual with the grandiose vision of the group always bring forward into the new freedom the poetic truth that the group's former oppressor, its old nemesis, is still alive and well. These identities always claim that the oppressor's evil was an entrenched feature of character rather than a lapse of character. And once the evil is characterological, it is poetic and eternal. It is truer than all the facts to the contrary. You say the formerly oppressed, with no way back to the golden past and no easy way ahead, almost reflexively invent new group identities to give themselves structure, a sense of place, and a platform upon which to pursue power. And so that last part is important because I often talk, if I'm going to describe identity politics, I need to tell people why it's bad. And the reason I use is because it's really power politics. It's the promise to deliver power to a group based on immutable characteristics over another group. And this is not unifying. This is not sustainable. This is divisive, and it's dangerous, and it creates conflict. And I have a problem with conflict when I'm trying to institute a stable society.
Right. Well, an emphasis on identity is the worst way to build a stable society. But again, it is. I think it came into being out of the 60s, out of this confession that America made. America, in a sense, empowered my identity when they said, "Yes, you were a victim. That's who you were." And so in the future, we're going to see you, even as we're going to see you that way. And it's your identity that wins you things. It's the fact that wins you school busing, that wins you affirmative action, that wins you diversity, this and that. It wins your identity is your currency. It's your power. Not you as an individual human being, but your identity. And so you begin to trade on that identity. You put that identity on the table. Hire me because I'm Black. You need diversity here. You need my identity in the room. And it was your exclusion of my identity in the past that put you in this vulnerable position today. And so you'll be happy to reward my identity. That's what we put Blacks in that situation. That's what we got. Rather than the truth, rather than the objective reality, the problem is development. Fair or not, you're going to have to work harder to make up that ground that oppression took away from you. And here's the hardest thing in the world. You ain't going to get no justice. Justice is an illusion. It keeps you tied to the past, to the idea that somehow you're going to be compensated, that you're going to get reparations and that's going to lift you up. No. Justice is not coming, no matter what. But America buys into this idea. We're going to provide Black. We're going to out of our commitment to justice. We're going to entitle people. And so you set up again. This game can only end in shakedowns, and that's where we're at.
And it's a bit of a misconstruing of the word justice too. When I think when it's used in that form, I often look at the phrase, the slogan, "No justice, no peace," and I find it fascinating because yeah, it means no power, no peace fundamentally. Because if you say no justice, no peace, well, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that. The entire American founding was based on this principle, right? We felt an injustice against the American colonies. We wrote out in glaring detail what those injustices were in the Declaration of Independence. And then we decided there would not be peace. We started a revolution. So the phrase is inherently American. But the problem is that you have to define justice properly, and it gets confusing when you're talking about justice for past sins that the people alive today are not responsible for, right? And so it really becomes about a power play more than anything else. And this is, as to your point, it becomes a shakedown, because what we're really saying is, if you don't give us the power we want, you're not going to get peace. And this entire election, in my mind, has been this really kind of diabolical teamwork between progressives, Antifa, these groups saying, if you don't elect us, you're not getting peace. And I've heard Nancy Pelosi say this various times, right? If this would all stop if Joe Biden was president, this is because of Trump. And so it feels like a hostage situation with a gun to our head. No peace without what we want, without our demands being met. It's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah, we have to stand up to that. I wish there was an easier way. I really, truly do. But in this realm of race, nothing is in history that's good has ever happened without some true amassing of courage and expression of courage. Like we're done. You're not going to do this anymore. This is, we see through this now. We see a shakedown as a shake. It isn't helping you. It's hurting you. It's keeping you lost in these delusions. And oh my God, I pray every day for a voice. If America is able to produce a voice for this, as we did with King, we produced a voice to break down discrimination, show it's evil. We need an articulate voice to do that with this point of view that you can't exploit your past victimization to move into modernity, into the modern world. It won't help you there. You have to join the modern world. It can't come to you. You have to come to it. And we have to, as blacks, we have to become Americans. We have to be insistently American.
And that was the message of Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass.
That's all. Again, I grew up in that movement. That was the message. We're not mad at America. We're mad that you're keeping us out. Well, we won the right finally to be in. Well, thank God. Now let's exploit that. Let's take advantage of that. That's the way to go. Conform. See the greatness in America. Identify with that greatness.
And the struggle with the past. I mean, it's a really important part of the theme that you're constantly talking about. And you use the term disassociation. And you write, disassociation ties the decency of individuals and the legitimacy of institutions and government to a demonstrable disassociation from America's past sins. And I think that's pretty obvious in what we see in white guilt. It's intense virtue signaling that we are not associated with that. And then, of course, for political purposes, they claim that conservatives are that, right? Conservatives represent the conserving of these old racist institutions. Now, history demonstrates otherwise. It's really Republicans that have consistently been on the right side of history on all of these issues, but that's for another conversation. On the philosophical level, though, I think the point you're making is important. And you write, the disassociations, and it's artificial. It's artificial virtue, or virtue signaling, really, because because the whole point is to avoid the selflessness, sacrifice, and risk that true virtue inevitably involves. And so, this gets to the discussion about, okay, what can conservatives do better to have this conversation? And you're right, conservatism has no quick disassociative mechanisms. It lumbers along struggling with difficult principles that ask America's former victims to take considerable responsibility for their own advancement. We don't offer disassociation. And so I guess, and you're right. I mean, that's true. And we've been over this a couple of times throughout this conversation, when I'm asked, what are you going to do for me? It's like, I'm not going to engage in that kind of, that pandering. And so, what is your, and this will be my final question to you. What's your message to conservatives on how to properly talk about this and not be scared into submission and lean into it a little bit better?
Well, of course, I can be dramatic and say the answer is always is courage. And then that's what I mean. Courage is when I grew up in the civil rights movement, and people don't remember this. I remember it vividly. My father would go around and he would try to get people to in our neighborhood to come out for a demonstration. I remember once we were demonstrating lunch counters at Walgreens, and we needed some people to demonstrate. And they would say, "Mr. Steele, you're getting us all in trouble. You're getting us all in trouble. We're not coming out there. We're not going to demonstrate like that and be seen." My father continued to run into that in the Black community. As time passed, as the civil rights movement began to gradually mount, as King began to emerge as the leader, more and more people, one by one, began to find that courage. And that's when you began to see, like in Montgomery, the women housekeepers who walked to work rather than rode the bus. Woman who names escape me.
Rosa Parks
wouldn't get up. There's courage to sit and occupy her seat on the bus as any other bus. Well, the courage then became the thing. It was a cultural moment for us. This is it. We're no longer going to live like Black people have been living. We're going to stop it. Now we're going to try to do this peacefully. Though, of course, Malcolm X was off in the wings there, saying if you don't do it peacefully, we're not backing up. So it was done peacefully, but people found the courage over a rather brief period of time, in the late mid 50s up to the mid 60s, and they won. Then we passed one civil rights bill after another. I think conservatives are now, ironically, in that same spot. More and more individually are going to have to find the courage to say, you are shaking me down. I know that's what you may not even know it. You may really believe this notion of that you're victimized by white racism, that systemic racism. You may even believe that garbage. But I don't believe it. There's racism in this world, yes. There always will be. There's stupidity in this world, I always like to say, and there will always be that. We have to fight against both of them. We'll never be in a position where we won't have to monitor that. That's a different issue than us moving into modernity, into the modern world. And that's where I think conservatives can be just inspiring. Blacks have never been told a second of truth from America since the mid-60s.
Yeah.
Just been given garbage about our victimization and how pitiful we are, how weak we are, how helpless we are. And we bought into it. We believe we are now. Well, some conservatives can say that. I say to them what Trump said to blacks. You got nothing to lose. They don't like you anyway. For all the wrong reasons. Have the courage to say humbly, nicely, empathetically. One of the things I believe is that you want to communicate, you have to show the person you're communicating to. You have to offer some witness to their suffering.
Yeah.
Blacks have not had an easy journey. We witnessed that. But
and that's a good point, because there's no denying the disparities, right? And now the left's trick is to translate those disparities into systemic discrimination. And the right has to acknowledge, as you're saying, in a heartfelt way, acknowledge the disparities, acknowledge the suffering, but then say, look, these are the reasons for it. And we have to have an honest conversation about it and what to do about it. And as it turns out, the conservative way of free markets, empowering the people, and it doesn't, and like you said, it's not always easy to be empowered, right? Because that takes that comes with it a sense of responsibility. But it's the only way to get success. It's the only way. That's proven through millennia.
Yep.
It's the only way. And I think honesty and telling the truth is a good way to do it, but with empathy. And so I think that is a great message, and courage. I like the word courage.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Shelby Steele, thank you so much for being on. Great discussion. I think people really enjoyed this one.
Well, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed myself, I must say.
Good. I appreciate hearing that. I'm going through everybody at Hoover Institute. It's full of great minds. So, hey, Dr. Steele, really appreciate you. Appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you very much.